I crammed the last of my camera gear into my overstuffed bag and fished out my cell phone. 11 missed calls. All from the city's parking enforcement. A knot formed in my stomach even before I opened the text message. Vehicle towed from the hotel's temporary loading zone. Retrieve within 24 hours to avoid escalating charges. Perfect. Just perfect. I'd been so consumed by the corporate event shoot, lost in the staged smiles and forced camaraderie, that time had simply ceased to exist. The hotel manager, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with disdain, had warned me, in no uncertain terms, that the temporary zone was a mere 30-minute grace period. I had brazenly overstayed that welcome by a staggering 3 hours. Freelance photography, in its notoriously fickle nature, rarely provided a lavish income. Certainly not enough to absorb the financial gut punch of such monumental carelessness. Lily tugged at the sleeve of my worn coat, her small face a crumpled map of exhaustion. "Mommy, I'm hungry." "I know, sweetheart. We'll find something to eat soon." I struggled to keep my voice even, a calm facade masking the unbearable weight pressing down on my chest. Beyond the revolving glass doors of the Chicago hotel, the rain was not just falling. It was a deluge. Not the gentle, melancholic autumn drizzle we had strolled through earlier, but a furious, blinding curtain of white water. It was as if some vengeful god had decided to empty an entire lake onto the city. The kind of downpour that could saturate you to the bone in a matter of seconds. The kind that sent every self-respecting cab driver scurrying for cover. I opened my wallet with a sinking heart. After wrestling with the overdue electric bill, a constant battle against the looming darkness, and the painfully late fee at Lily's preschool, a symbol of my daily failings, I was left with a grand total of $43. The tow fee alone was a predatory $200. And that was just the starting point. Add the storage fees, the fines for illegal parking, a bureaucratic avalanche of charges, and I couldn't even bring myself to calculate the final, devastating sum. And the next payment from my corporate client? That was a mythical creature, a shimmering promise that might materialize in days, maybe weeks, if their notoriously sluggish accounting department didn't decide to stall yet again. Lily stood pressed against my leg, the relentless rainwater already darkening the cuffs of her tiny pants, her soft brown hair plastered to her forehead. She had been remarkably patient, a little soldier in the corner of that echoing ballroom, quietly coloring in the book I desperately snatched from home. She was always too patient, a quality heartbreakingly mature for a 5-year-old who should have been nestled in her pajamas, already adrift in the comforting embrace of sleep. By now, she should be tucked into bed, not shivering in the sterile glare of a hotel lobby at 9 o'clock on a weeknight. "Let's find somewhere dry to wait," I said, trying to infuse my voice with a confidence I didn't feel. "The rain will stop soon." It had to. But even as the words left my lips, I glanced at my phone, a gesture of self-inflicted torment. The weather app, in its cold, unfeeling accuracy, warned that the storm would rage on for at least 2 more hours. The frigid air sliced through my thin jacket like a shard of ice. I scooped Lily into my arms, her small hands icy as she wrapped them around my neck. Across the street, a corner cafe glowed with warm, inviting light. The kind of place with a gleaming marble bar, ridiculously overpriced $12 lattes, and patrons swathed in expensive coats, all pretending the brutal reality of the outside world didn't exist. I never ventured into places like that. But Lily was trembling, her small body shaking with cold, and I desperately needed somewhere, anywhere, to call for help. Someone, anyone who could offer a lifeline. As I pushed open the heavy door, a wave of warmth and the intoxicating aroma of roasted coffee washed over me, instantly loosening the knots in my shoulders. The cafe was overflowing, every table occupied. Lily gripped my hand tighter, her eyes wide and lost in the unfamiliar, upscale buzz. I scanned the room, my gaze darting from face to face, desperate. At the back, one table appeared to be empty. But no, a man sat there alone, shrouded in a dark overcoat, his slightly curled black hair catching the light from a nearby lamp. His eyes, dark and observant, were quietly surveying the room. His gaze paused on me, lingering for a moment, and I knew, with a certainty that sent a shiver down my spine, that the next words that left my mouth would irrevocably set everything else in motion. "May I sit here?" The man looked up when I spoke, his gaze lingering on Lily before returning to mine. He didn't answer right away. He simply tilted his head slightly, one brow arched in a gesture of subtle inquiry, as if he was carefully weighing some unseen factor. I braced myself for rejection, ready to turn away and face the storm, but then he gave a small nod, his voice low and surprisingly firm. "Sit, but you're not leaving anytime soon." I didn't have time to fully grasp the meaning of his words. Lily tugged at my hand, silently pleading for rest. I pulled out the chair, gently lifted her onto my lap, and became acutely aware of just how soaked and utterly drained I was. The man didn't say another word. He simply raised a hand, summoning the attention of a passing server. Less than a minute later, as if by magic, a steaming hot cocoa and a delicate pastry appeared on the table, placed gently before Lily. I turned toward him, ready to refuse, to stammer some feeble excuse about not being able to afford anything. But he gave a quiet shake of his head, his eyes never leaving Lily as she hesitantly broke off a small piece of pastry, pausing to study it before finally tasting it. "How old is she?" His voice was steady and deep, a resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us. "5," I answered softly, not intending to say more. He nodded. I kept my arms wrapped around Lily, a protective embrace against the cold and the unsettling atmosphere of the cafe. Her trembling had eased, but I could feel myself growing increasingly uneasy. This cafe, this man, the sharp intensity of his gaze. He didn't look like someone who should blend into a crowd. I glanced at him again, taking in the details. A tailored dark suit, the kind that whispered of Seville Row, an expensive watch, its face gleaming even in the dim light, a composure too deliberate, too controlled, for someone sitting alone at 9:30 at night. He wasn't trying to seem approachable or friendly, or even particularly human. Yet, there was something magnetically compelling about him, as if the entire room unconsciously shifted to match his internal rhythm. He took a measured sip of espresso, then studied me once more, his eyes unwavering. "What do you do?" I hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing my face. Then I replied, "Photography. Freelance. I just finished shooting an event at the hotel across the street, and my car got towed." My voice sounded weightless, as though even I no longer believed my work amounted to much. He leaned forward, his forearm resting on the table, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that bordered on unnerving. "How much do you need to get your car back?" I froze, every nerve ending firing in alarm. I hadn't come here to ask for money. All I had wanted was a dry place for my daughter, a temporary refuge from the storm. "I know," he said calmly, his voice devoid of judgment. "I'm not offering out of pity. I'm asking because I need a photographer this week." My eyes widened in surprise, but he continued before I could speak, cutting off my stammered protests before they even formed. "My mother is turning 65. Private gathering. Important. I need someone to capture it. Not the staged kind of photography, the stiff poses and forced smiles, but someone who can see the real moments, the fleeting shoulder touches, the meaningful glances, the things nobody else notices." I blinked, still trying to process his words, the unexpectedness of his offer. I don't have a studio. I only work outdoors, at events." "I saw how you held your daughter," he said, cutting me off again. "And I know that's the kind of person I need." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a textured business card, the kind that felt expensive to the touch. It was printed with the name Vincent Moretti. No address, just a phone number. He placed it on the table, his gaze unwavering, challenging me to accept. "Take it. I'll pay half up front if you accept." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to breathe. Every instinct inside me lit up like a warning siren, blaring alarms. No one offered work this way. No one made such bold propositions to a stranger in the midst of a late-night storm. But his eyes weren't pleading. They weren't trying to convince or rush me. They were simply certain, a quiet confidence that radiated from him like heat. I looked at Lily, warm now, the trembling gone, sipping her cocoa. The first genuine smile of the entire day was blooming gently on her lips. And I knew, with a clarity that surprised even me, that whatever this turned into, whatever hidden dangers might lie beneath the surface, I couldn't walk away from this chance. I picked up the business card, holding it as if it might vanish into thin air if I didn't clutch it tightly. Vincent Moretti. The name felt both strange and vaguely familiar, as though I had heard it whispered somewhere before, on the fleeting pages of a newspaper or in hushed tones behind the scenes of some forgotten event. I didn't say anything, and I didn't need to. He gave a small nod, as if my answer had already been spoken, then looked at Lily with a softened gaze, a hint of something melancholy in his eyes. I don't know how long I sat in that cafe, lost in a whirlwind of confusion and conflicting emotions. All I remember is that when I finally stood up, the rain had eased to a gentle drizzle and Lily had fallen asleep in my arms, her small body limp with exhaustion. I was still fumbling to figure out how to get her home, my mind racing with possibilities and anxieties, when a sleek black car rolled up to the window. Vincent signaled to the driver, a silent command to open the door, then turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Marcus will take you both home safely." I didn't have time to refuse. The decision had already been made, dictated by forces beyond my control. In the car, I held Lily close, looking at Vincent through the fogged window. He didn't smile, didn't wave, simply stood there like a statue carved from shadow beneath the flickering streetlights. The business card in my hand felt warmer now, slightly damp from the sweat of my palm. The next morning, while Lily was still lost in the peaceful oblivion of sleep, I took my phone and dialed the number on the card. A gentle female voice answered almost immediately, as if she had been waiting by the phone. "Miss Parker, correct? Mr. Moretti instructed us that, if you agree, the car will pick you up tomorrow afternoon. Everything will be prepared." I barely managed to stammer. "Prepared? What?" she added, her voice calm and precise. "You won't need to bring anything except your camera. Wardrobe will be provided. A professional working space has been arranged. The event will be held in Lake Forest, at the family residence. And by the way, the deposit has already been transferred." My hands trembled as I opened my email and saw the bank notification. $500 had been deposited into my account, accompanied by a brief, cryptic note, "For trust." I had never been paid up front for any job, especially not in such a generous sum, and never had a job felt so much like a test of faith. I spent the entire morning pacing around my small apartment, the four walls seeming to shrink in around me, thoughts spinning in a relentless, dizzying circle. I should refuse. I should return the money and say no. Run far, far away. But I couldn't deny the way Vincent had looked at me last night, the quiet, unwavering way he had cared for Lily without asking questions. It made me feel as though he had seen something in me, some hidden potential, something I hadn't realized was even visible. And I was so tired, bone-weary tired, of turning down every opportunity, of letting fear dictate my choices, just because the past had relentlessly taught me that every good thing came with an inevitable price. I didn't want Lily to grow up in a world where her mother avoided anything remotely good simply because the past had convinced her that joy was a dangerous illusion. The next afternoon, right on time, with an unnerving punctuality, the black car returned. Marcus, the tall, solemn man I had seen the night before, opened the door and bowed slightly, as if we were honored guests, royalty being conveyed to some exclusive event. During the nearly hour-long drive, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety. Lily, meanwhile, oblivious to my inner turmoil, looked out the window with pure, unadulterated delight, watching the sprawling houses drift by, the afternoon sunlight painting her cheeks with a rosy glow. I told myself that whatever awaited us, whatever strange and potentially dangerous situation I had stumbled into, as long as she was safe, I would face it. When the car turned onto a stone-paved road, winding its way through a dense forest of towering trees, leading to a sprawling estate hidden behind imposing iron gates and meticulously trimmed greenery, I knew, with a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, that I had stepped into a different world entirely. A world where invitations were never just about work. A world where secrets lurked beneath the surface of polite conversation. A world where every gaze followed you from the moment you crossed the first gate, scrutinizing your every move. As the car slowed to a stop before the mansion, it took me several seconds to fully process what I was seeing, to accept that this was where I would be working, where I would be spending the next few days. The ornate black iron gates had opened without a sound, revealing a straight cobblestone path lined with perfectly trimmed evergreens, standing as disciplined as soldiers in formation. Even the air felt different here, thick, still, almost oppressive, like a heavy curtain drawn around the place, isolating it from the outside world. Lily pressed her face to the window, wide-eyed with wonder. "Whose house is this, Mommy? Is it a castle?" I couldn't answer. I simply stroked her hair, offering a silent reassurance I desperately wished I felt myself. Marcus drove past a meticulously manicured courtyard garden, where lavender bushes arched in careful curves, their fragrant blooms dotted with ancient stone statues veiled in moss. The mansion itself looked like something pulled from an old European film, a Gothic masterpiece of shadowed grandeur. 3 stories of pale gray stone, a dark, imposing tiled roof, tall arched windows catching the fading light of the afternoon sun. Wide stone steps led to the main entrance, where 2 men in identical black suits stood waiting, their expressions impassive, unreadable. When Marcus opened the door for us to step out, I instinctively tightened my grip on Lily's hand, a primal need to protect her from the unseen dangers lurking in the shadows. No one spoke. They simply bowed slightly, a gesture of practiced deference, and gestured for us to follow them. The massive wooden doors opened with a silent grace, and I stepped into a world completely unlike my own, a world of unimaginable wealth and unspoken power. The foyer was so large it could have swallowed my entire apartment, and still had room to spare. The ceiling rose nearly 20 feet high, adorned with crystal chandeliers that cascaded from the vaulted beams like frozen waterfalls, their facets scattering rainbows across the polished marble floor. The air carried a subtle, yet pervasive scent, a sophisticated blend of old oak, beeswax, and an expensive perfume that hinted at secrets and hidden desires. Large oil paintings, portraits of stern-faced ancestors, hung in gilded frames, each one a story frozen in color, a silent testament to the family's long and complicated history. At the end of the hall stood a woman in a black silk dress, her silver hair twisted into a tight, severe bun. There was something about her posture, the regal bearing, and the quiet air of authority that didn't demand obedience, but somehow made you instinctively offer it. This was Lucia Moretti, Vincent's mother, the matriarch of this opulent domain. When I approached, she didn't offer a smile, didn't extend a hand in welcome. She simply looked at Lily, and something in her eyes softened, a fleeting expression of tenderness that vanished as quickly as it appeared, as if touched by an old ache, a long-forgotten grief. "How old is the child?" she asked, her faint Italian accent turning the words into a gentle breeze. 5, I answered, trying to remain steady, to project an air of confidence I certainly didn't possess. She nodded, her lips pressing together briefly before she turned back to me, her gaze intense, unwavering, as if she were trying to see straight through me. Her eyes tell stories. Capturing that is an art. Vincent appeared at the top of the grand staircase at that moment, his presence filling the space. Today he was dressed more simply, just a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, but the way he moved, unhurried and confident, the way he commanded the space around him, made the entire house seem to pause, holding its breath. His gaze went to Lily first, a silent acknowledgement, then to me, an unspoken greeting, a confirmation that I had, indeed, passed some unseen test. "Everything is ready," he said, his voice low and resonant. I brushed a stray strand of hair from Lily's face and asked if she was tired, if she needed a rest. She shook her head, still staring with fascination at a stone angel sculpture nearby, its wings spread wide, its face serene. Lucia spoke again, her voice softer now, almost persuasive. "Let her play with Rosa, the housekeeper's daughter. You may follow Marcus to view the workspace. I hesitated, unsure about leaving Lily alone in this strange, imposing place, but Vincent's quiet look steadied me, reassured me in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't understand the trust one felt, the inexplicable connection that had formed between us in such a short amount of time, but something in his eyes made me feel less alone, less vulnerable. Marcus led me down a long corridor, the polished wooden floors reflecting the light like liquid gold. Every door we passed opened into another world, each more opulent than the last. A music room with an antique piano, its keys yellowed with age, a library with hundreds of leather-bound books, their spines embossed with gold lettering, a glass-walled dining room overlooking a still, dark lake, its surface reflecting the fading light like a mirror to the sky. When we reached what they called the temporary studio, I couldn't believe my eyes. Perfect light, pouring in through a wall of windows, professional equipment, the kind I could only dream of owning, everything arranged with meticulous care, as though I were some renowned photographer invited to shoot a major campaign. I stood there silently for a few seconds, completely overwhelmed, a strange feeling rising in my chest, a mix of excitement and profound unease. It was like stepping into someone else's dream, a meticulously crafted fantasy that didn't belong to me, yet somehow was holding its hand out, inviting me to enter. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within my soul, that nothing would ever be the same after this. I was still lost in a daze of disbelief when Marcus signaled for me to return to the main room. As we walked through the seemingly endless marble corridors beneath the soft, golden light, my mind swirled in a confused and disoriented haze. Back in the sitting area, I found Lily perched on a large red velvet armchair, her small legs swinging back and forth, beside a little girl about 6 years old, with golden curls and bright brown eyes that sparkled with mischief. Rosa was giggling, showing Lily glittery stickers in a well-worn storybook. In the quiet of that moment, Lucia Moretti remained seated on a long chaise lounge near the window, her hands resting on the arm, her gaze never leaving Lily. Something in that look made me pause, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't the usual scrutiny the wealthy reserved for outsiders, the thinly veiled judgment of someone who didn't quite belong. It was something deeper, something more profound, something like grief brushing against hope, a longing for something that had been lost. I slowed my steps, trying to keep my breathing even, to appear calm and collected, as Lucia turned toward me, her eyes seeming to read through every layer of me, peeling back the masks I wore to reveal the vulnerable woman beneath. "She's a friendly child," she said softly, her voice hushed, but still sharp, its tone demanding attention. "Lily is a good girl. She's used to adapting quickly." I tried to keep my voice steady, to hide the anxiety that was clawing at my insides. Lucia nodded, her gaze drifting back to Lily, lingering on her with a wistful expression. "She reminds me of someone. A little girl who once sat in that exact spot, with the same soft brown hair and the same way of looking at people, as though she saw more than she should." I didn't speak, unsure whether to ask for clarification or simply listen, allowing her to reveal whatever secrets she was ready to share. Lucia sensed my hesitation. She turned slightly, looking directly at me, her eyes filled with a deep, abiding sadness. "Dominic's daughter, Sophia, my first grandchild. She passed away 2 years ago in an accident." My throat tightened, the words catching like a jagged stone. I wasn't sure if it was her grief, the raw pain that hung in the air around her, or something hollow blooming inside my own chest, a recognition of shared loss. Lily ran to me then, sensing my unease, resting her head against my shoulder the way she always did when strangers watched me too closely, when the world felt too big and too overwhelming. Lucia leaned forward, her voice lowering, becoming almost conspiratorial. "You don't need to be afraid. This is a safe place. Vincent doesn't choose people at random. If he brought you and the child here, he must have seen something. Something particular." I didn't know how to respond, how to articulate the jumble of emotions churning inside me. Maybe it was something particular that he had seen, some hidden talent or untapped potential. Maybe it was just timing, pure, unadulterated luck. But her gentle tone didn't make me feel examined, judged. It made me feel invited, as if I'd been given a chance to prove something, to live up to a potential even I hadn't fully realized yet. She rose and walked toward Lily, bending slightly to place her hand on my daughter's head, a gesture of unexpected tenderness. Her hand was thin, the skin translucent and dotted with age, but her touch was gentle in a way that surprised me. Lily looked up at her and smiled, a bright, unguarded smile that lit up her entire face. Lucia didn't smile back, but her eyes glistened, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had formed between them. "I would like you to take a photograph of me with Lily," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "Just the two of us in the back garden under the maple tree. Vincent knows the place." Her voice was calm, steady, as though she had thought about this moment long before I arrived, as if it were the culmination of some unspoken desire. I nodded, unable to say more, the words caught in my throat. Not out of fear, but because something fragile had formed between us. A quiet thread stretching from loss to possibility, from old memories to something unnamed and new, a bridge built across the chasm of grief. When she left the room, I held Lily closer, my thoughts trembling, a chaotic jumble of questions and uncertainties. I had entered this house for a job, a simple photography assignment, but perhaps things were already moving far beyond that, spiraling into something far more complex, far more dangerous. And perhaps the way Lucia Moretti looked at Lily, with that mixture of longing and quiet sadness, was the first sign of the secrets I was nowhere near ready to face, the hidden truths that lay buried beneath the surface of this opulent and enigmatic world. The party took place the next afternoon beneath the gentle blue of an October sky, the last vestiges of summer clinging stubbornly to the air. The garden behind the mansion had been transformed into something breathtaking, a scene of unparalleled elegance and understated beauty. Dozens of round tables were draped in crisp white linen, each adorned with elaborate arrangements of white roses intertwined with pale peonies, set carefully inside antique crystal vases that sparkled in the sunlight. The golden light filtering through the branches of the maple trees, blazing in shades of crimson and gold, created a magical, ethereal atmosphere. I stood still for a moment before beginning my work, letting my eyes take in every detail, absorbing the atmosphere, searching for the first perfect angle, the first glimpse of a story waiting to be told. The air carried an elegance that wasn't ostentatious, a refined sensibility that spoke of generations of wealth and impeccable taste. Everything was arranged with such delicate precision that it felt as though every crystal glass and folded napkin had its own role in a quiet symphony. Vincent appeared, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his tie perfectly knotted, not a single wrinkle in sight. He stood beside his mother, Lucia, who wore a deep sapphire silk gown that accentuated her silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Her expression was radiant with authority, yet touched by a hint of melancholy, a sense of introspection that hinted at hidden depths. Lily sat with Rosa at a table near the lavender bushes. The two girls bent over a puzzle, their heads close together in concentration. Lucia's gaze drifted toward them every so often, lingering longer on Lily, as if she were reaching for something that had slipped out of her grasp long ago, a connection that could never be fully reclaimed. I began my work, the camera feeling like an extension of my hands, a tool to capture not just images, but emotions, memories, the ephemeral moments that defined a life. I didn't shoot like a typical event photographer, rushing from group to group, trying to capture every toast and every forced smile. I moved slowly, observing, waiting for the genuine moments to unfold. A father's adoring eyes as he watched his young daughter twirl in the afternoon light, an elderly mother's hand resting on her son's shoulder as they spoke softly together, the faint tightening of fingers between an elderly couple as they quietly took their seats, a silent language of love spoken across the years. Those were the moments I believed Vincent wanted me to keep, the fleeting connections, the unspoken emotions that revealed the true heart of the event. I turned to catch a backlit shot of Lucia, positioning myself to soften the halo of light around her silver hair, capturing the subtle lines etched on her face by time and experience. I felt Vincent's eyes on me, a constant, unwavering presence. Not the curious or doubtful look the other guests had given me earlier, the veiled scrutiny of someone who didn't quite belong, but the kind of gaze someone uses when they're watching the rhythm you create inside their world, the way you interpret their reality. I dipped my head slightly in a quiet greeting, acknowledging his presence, and continued my work. When Lucia rose and walked toward Lily, I lifted my camera immediately, anticipating the moment. The instant she bent down and placed her hand gently on my daughter's shoulder, the last rays of the day cast a thin halo of light around them, creating a scene of ethereal beauty. I held my breath and pressed the shutter, capturing the image forever. In that instant, time seemed to slow, the world around me fading into a soft, muted blur. No one smiled. No one posed. Just a seasoned woman and an innocent child standing together in a garden heavy with unspoken memories. A silent conversation between generations. I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within my soul, that it would be the most important photograph of the day, the image that would capture the essence of the event, the one that would linger in the memory long after the last guest had departed. After the party, when everyone moved inside to prepare for the evening dinner, Vincent approached me, his presence radiating an aura of quiet power. He didn't offer pleasantries or perfunctory comments about the party. He simply looked at the camera hanging around my neck, his eyes intense, probing, and said, "You see what others overlook." Before I could respond, before I could stammer out some awkward attempt at gratitude, he added, "Don't leave after you send the photos. I want you to review them with me one by one." I nodded, surprised by his request. I had never had a client ask to go through the photos alongside me, to dissect each image, to delve into the stories they told. It was an unusual request, but I found myself strangely intrigued. Vincent turned away then, walking slowly toward his mother, his movements graceful and deliberate. Lucia glanced at him, her expression unreadable, and their eyes met for a brief, fleeting moment, a silent exchange in which I felt something unsaid pass between them, a kind of agreement, or perhaps the quiet understanding of people who communicate through silence, their bond forged through years of shared history and unspoken secrets. As I packed up my equipment, my thoughts tangled, a jumbled mess of impressions and emotions. I had done this work hundreds of times at hundreds of different gatherings, capturing weddings, corporate events, family reunions, but never had I felt I was truly capturing something so weighty, something so profound. It wasn't just about preserving moments in time. It was about holding on to something that was on the verge of changing, something fragile and precious that could easily be lost. And I knew that today, in some small way, I had left my mark on this world, that I had contributed something meaningful to this family's story. Perhaps through a single photograph, a single moment captured in time, a photograph that might change everything. I was in the temporary workspace Vincent had arranged, the professional studio that still felt surreal, carefully reviewing each image from Lucia's birthday celebration on my laptop screen. The moments unfolded like vivid fragments of memory, from Lucia's tender tilt of the head as she watched Lily play to the complicated glances exchanged between the members of the Moretti family, unspoken emotions simmering beneath the surface of polite conversation. I was so absorbed in my work, so completely lost in the images before me, that I didn't hear anyone enter the room until a voice cut through the air behind me, dry and sharp as a blade. "Who are you?" I turned, startled, my heart leaping into my throat. A man stood there, his presence imposing, his eyes filled with a simmering hostility. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair cut short and severe, his black suit fitted as if it had been tailored just for him. His gray eyes were cold and clouded, like a London fog, their gaze piercing and unforgiving. Dominic Moretti, I recognized him instantly. Vincent's older brother, Lucia's eldest son, the one I had not yet seen since arriving at the mansion, the one whose name hung in the air like a silent accusation. I stood, trying to keep my voice steady, to project an air of calm I certainly didn't feel. "I'm Emily Parker." Vincent invited me to photograph the family event. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze unwavering, his presence filling the room with a palpable tension. His eyes were so cold, so devoid of warmth, that it felt as though they could peel away my skin and expose whatever secrets I carried, whatever vulnerabilities I tried to hide. "Vincent has a habit of bringing strangers into this house without warning," he said, his voice laced with disdain. "It's a disruptive and frankly unwelcome habit." I didn't respond, unsure what I could say that might ease the tension instead of intensify it. Any words felt inadequate, a clumsy intrusion into a family drama I didn't understand. His eyes flicked toward the laptop screen, lingering on the photo of Lily and Lucia, standing together in the garden, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. His expression darkened, a flicker of something bitter crossing his face. Does he truly think that bringing a child here will soften my mother again? That he can replace what was lost? I blinked, not fully understanding the implications of his words, the hidden meaning behind his accusations. Something unpolished, something raw and visceral, had slipped out from beneath the family's flawless exterior, a glimpse into the deep-seated tensions that simmered beneath the surface. Dominic let out a low, humorless laugh, the sound devoid of any genuine amusement. Perhaps he's forgotten that the smallest, most harmless things are the ones that cause the... Here's the translation, rewritten and expanded. The consequences could be devastating just like they were for Sophia. "Do you know who Sophia is?" he questioned, his gaze intense. "A photographer?" I managed a slight nod, my pulse accelerating against my ribs. Dominic closed the remaining distance between us, now standing mere feet away. "She was my daughter, my mother's first grandchild, and the one who turned our world upside down by making the grave mistake of loving the wrong person." I wasn't sure where he was going with this, but the atmosphere in the room had grown thick, oppressive, like the stillness before a violent summer thunderstorm. He continued, his voice a low rumble, each word hitting me with the force of a drumbeat. "I don't care where you come from, or what Vincent has told you. This is my home, and I will not stand by and watch my son get entangled with a child whose background remains shrouded in mystery." I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, but the words seemed to catch in my throat, refusing to form. There was something else in his tone, beyond anger. It was raw fear, a tremor stemming from a past that everyone in this house was desperately trying to keep buried. Dominic fixed me with one last, unwavering stare. "You have absolutely no idea what you've walked into." Then he turned and abruptly left, the door slamming shut behind him like a final, sharp warning. I stood there, frozen in place for what felt like an eternity, a knot tightening in my chest. Everything that had seemed so perfect about the Moretti family, from the imposing ancient stone walls to their carefully orchestrated gatherings, now revealed a network of cracks running deep beneath the surface. And I was beginning to realize that perhaps my presence here wasn't solely about taking photographs. Vincent wasn't the only one with a vested interest in drawing me into this world. And Dominic, the look in his eyes when he looked at Lily, it made me shiver, not with hatred, but because, for a fleeting moment, I saw the ghost of a father who had lost his child. And what he feared most was witnessing a chillingly familiar tragedy unfold again in the small, vulnerable form of my daughter. That night, sleep eluded me. The guest room prepared for Lily and me was situated on the second floor, its windows overlooking the meticulously manicured gardens. The soft, inviting glow of string lights wound around the trellis created a hazy, dreamlike effect, like an unfinished oil painting suspended in the darkness. Lily had succumbed to sleep almost instantly, her small arms wrapped tightly around the worn stuffed bear Rosa had gifted her. But I couldn't bring myself to close my eyes. Dominic's words echoed relentlessly in my mind, a whisper sharp enough to disturb every corner of my thoughts. Asterisk, you have no idea what you've walked into. In the stillness of the late hour, I opened my laptop and searched for the name Sophia Moretti. It wasn't difficult to find, though every piece of information was carefully curated, bearing the restrained, polished tone that was characteristic of powerful families. She was Dominic's daughter, born when he was still a young man, a student at a prestigious art school on the East Coast, gifted in painting, and once invited to participate in a group exhibition in New York. The few photos that still circulated showed a young woman with deep, soulful eyes and long, flowing hair. She looked almost strikingly like a younger Lucia. But at the age of 20, Sophia had died. The official cause of death was a car accident on her way home after an exhibition. Her car had inexplicably lost control, crashed through a bridge railing, and plunged into the icy depths of a river below. There were no signs of pursuit, no evidence of substances in her blood. It was a quiet death, swiftly and discreetly concluded with a private family funeral and no further investigation. I shut the laptop, but the questions continued to churn within me. Why did Dominic speak of it as if it were a wound that would never fully heal? And why did the sight of Lily provoke such an intense reaction from him? The next morning, I brought the memory card to the workspace, just as Vincent had instructed. The room was located on the ground floor, its windows opening onto a narrow stone path that led down to the tranquil lake. Vincent was seated at the large wooden desk, his sleeves rolled up, meticulously reviewing the photographs from the party, one by one. When I entered, he didn't immediately look up. He paused on a particular image. It was the one where Lucia had placed her hand on Lily's shoulder, a gesture of unexpected warmth. He enlarged the photo before finally turning his gaze toward me. "Did you know that my mother didn't speak to Dominic for 2 years?" I shook my head, my chest constricting. Vincent continued, his voice even, but far from cold. "After Sophia's death, my mother was simply hollowed out. Dominic blamed the family and she blamed herself. But the person truly responsible, the one who dragged Sophia down into that destructive spiral, was her lover." I swallowed hard. Who was he? A drug trafficker with connections to the Russian Mafia. Sophia kept everything hidden. We only learned the truth after she was gone. Vincent looked directly at me, his eyes piercing. Dominic vowed that he would never allow another child in this family to be dragged into that kind of world. So, when he saw Lily, that was his reaction. I sat down, exhaling slowly. Did she have a child with him? Vincent shook his head. "No, but my mother has always believed that if Sophia had lived, perhaps she would have changed. She would have cut ties, started over. When she looks at Lily, I think she sees the future that Sophia never had the chance to realize." I stared at the screen. Lily was smiling, her brown hair glowing in the soft sunlight. The image possessed a purity so sharp it ached. Vincent spoke softly. "You're nothing like Sophia, but you carry a piece of what we lost." I didn't fully grasp what he meant. A certain kind of bravery perhaps, or a capacity for sacrifice, or simply the way I looked at my daughter. But in that moment I understood one thing. I was no longer an outsider. I had unknowingly stepped into an old, unhealed wound. A story left unfinished within a family shaped by both power and profound grief. And somehow, I had become the one holding the only tool capable of telling it. My photographs. The days following the birthday passed in a quiet, strangely comforting rhythm. I no longer felt like a stranger. Lucia occasionally invited me for morning tea in the sunlit reading room, its windows overlooking the fragrant lavender garden. Rosa and Lily became inseparable, like twin sisters bound by some gentle, invisible thread. Lily learned the names of the plants in the garden, painted alongside Lucia, and her face would light up whenever she spotted Vincent at the end of the hallway. Vincent didn't say much, but he was always there when needed. On afternoons when I worked in the temporary studio, he would invariably pass by at the precise moment Lily was trying on a new dress or tilting her head to study the way the light fell on a wall. He never intruded, never sought attention, but the way he watched her, the way he seemed to catalog each small moment, told me something was changing, something significant that didn't need to be spoken aloud. One evening, a light rain tapped softly against the windows. I stood in the auxiliary kitchen, preparing a small meal for Lily, who had barely touched her dinner. Vincent came in, his sleeves rolled up, holding a damp towel as if he'd just come in from working in the garden. He saw me, set the towel aside, washed his hands, and without a word, took a small bowl and began helping me cut fruit. I froze for a second, surprised not just by the gesture, but by how natural it felt, how effortless, how familiar. No one issued orders. No one asked for permission. It unfolded in quiet harmony, gently, almost tenderly. Lily burst into the kitchen, clutching her worn cloth doll, her eyes lighting up at the sight of Vincent. She climbed into the chair beside him without hesitation, whispering something that made him laugh. For the first time, I heard Vincent laugh aloud, a real laugh, not a polite curve of the lips, but a sound that softened his entire face. "She wants banana with peanut butter," he translated for me, still smiling. I looked at her, then at him. The two of them in that moment felt like pieces that had once been lost, now finding their way back into place. I finished cleaning up and stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Vincent feed Lily small pieces of fruit. His hands steady, his gaze gentle, as though what he was doing was the most natural thing in the world. No one mentioned the past. No one speculated about the future. But I could feel the distance between us shrinking day by day. One afternoon, while I was adjusting the lighting in the library, Lucia entered and quietly settled into the chair opposite me. Her gaze was no longer as sharp as it had been the first time we met. It had softened. "Vincent hasn't spent this much time with anyone since Sophia died," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "He may seem reserved, but once he lets someone into his world, it is not easy for them to leave." I said nothing, unsure of what response could possibly fit. Lucia placed her hand on a framed picture of Lily and Rosa laughing among the flowers. "I don't know what your intentions are, but if there is anything worth beginning again for, it is moments like these." I nodded just slightly, but something in my chest tightened. Not from fear, but from the weight of the knowledge that every choice from here on carried more significance than before. I was no longer just a freelance photographer shooting events to pay the rent. I was someone standing inside a family stitched together with old wounds and complex histories. And I had brought Lily with me. Lily, a small flicker of light inside a house long accustomed to shadows. Vincent still hadn't said anything to me about what he felt. But every gesture, every look he gave Lily, every moment he quietly positioned himself at the edges of our day-to-day life, was an answer far clearer than any spoken confession. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time in many years I found myself wondering whether this place could be home. That morning was an ordinary one. The sky, a gentle blue, sunlight filtering through the maple leaves in the garden, creating a peaceful stillness that made it feel as though everything in the world was precisely where it was meant to be. Lily and I ate breakfast in the greenhouse behind the mansion, where Rosa had proudly arranged a plate of cookies she'd baked herself. Lily laughed as she played, her cheeks flushed pink, her tiny hands twirling her familiar cloth doll. Vincent had left early to meet with a business partner whose name I didn't know, and Lucia was in the tea room receiving an elderly guest from Italy. I took the opportunity to adjust some of the new photographs while Lily and Rosa asked permission to play in the garden. 2 guards followed, as always. I nodded, my eyes still fixed on the laptop screen. Moments later, I heard the dogs barking viciously near the side gate. Instinct jolted through me, but I forced myself to believe it was just a squirrel or someone dropping something. Then Marcus burst in, pale as chalk. "Emily, where's Lily?" I shot up from my seat, my heart seizing. "She's in the garden with Rosa." He didn't say another word. He whipped out his phone and barked into it, his voice tight as wire. "Lock every gate. Check all cameras." I ran outside, my pulse pounding so hard it hurt. The garden was empty. Lily was gone. Only Rosa remained, sobbing beside the stone fountain, her small hand trembling as she pointed toward the western fence. They took her. A black car. They pushed her in and drove away. I dropped to my knees beside Rosa, gripping her shoulders, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Did they say anything?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. All she remembered was 2 masked men in black. Everything after that dissolved into chaos. The entire mansion erupted into motion. Dominic appeared first, shouting orders as he summoned every guard to the surveillance room. Lucia sat frozen, her face drained of color. Vincent returned near noon, just as I stood in the living room, trembling so hard I could barely breathe. He didn't ask me anything. He didn't need an explanation. He simply looked at me, and there are no words to describe that look. It was anguish without sound. Fury restrained so tightly it darkened the air around him. Vincent strode straight into the surveillance room and slammed his hand on the desk. "Show me the footage." They replayed everything from the moment Lily and Rosa moved out of the main camera's view down the lavender path. A small black van, with no license plates, stopped at the exact second a guard was distracted by an internal call. Two men stepped out, seized Lily in less than 10 seconds, and disappeared toward the pine forest behind the estate. Dominic punched the wall, his knuckles splitting open as blood seeped from the skin. I stood paralyzed, numbness spreading from my chest all the way to my fingertips. It had taken only minutes in which I wasn't watching her. Minutes when I believed she was safe. Vincent turned to me and gripped my shoulders. His eyes were no longer cold. They were desperate, clinging to strength with every breath. "I swear, I will bring Lily back at any cost." I don't remember whether I nodded or simply collapsed into him. I only remember that when he left with Marcus and 3 other men, climbing into a charcoal SUV, I stood there clutching the tiny handkerchief Lily had dropped on the garden bench. A cold wind swept through the trees, and I knew the peaceful world I thought I had found had shattered. Everything now was a race against time, against darkness, against the deepest fear a mother can carry. I sat frozen in the library, Lily's handkerchief still clenched in my fist. My eyes locked on the phone Marcus had just handed me. A message had arrived from an unknown number. No text, only a video file. When I opened it, my heart plummeted. The first frame was Lily, her small hands lightly bound with cloth, sitting in an empty room with cold cement walls. She still wore the blue sweater I'd put on her that morning. Her hair was messy, but she wasn't hurt. Her eyes were wide with terror, tears shimmering as she tried to hold them back while staring toward the camera. A man's voice appeared off-screen, thick with a Russian accent, smooth and merciless. "Lily will remain unharmed if Vincent Moretti behaves." Then, a sheet of paper was held up to the lens, written in dark, heavy strokes. 24 hours. Bring the transaction code from the Bellini account. No police, no Dominic, or we will return her to you in pieces. I covered my mouth to stop myself from screaming. Dominic snatched the phone, fury flashing in his eyes. "Can't be them. They were driven out of Chicago 5 years ago." Marcus took the device and began tracing the signal. Lucia entered just as Vincent returned, dust and road grit still clinging to him, his rage barely constrained beneath the surface. When he saw me, he moved quickly, sitting beside me watching every frame of the video. When it ended, silence swallowed the room. The ticking clock on the wall was the only reminder that time was slipping through our fingers. My voice cracked into a whisper. "Who did this?" Vincent looked up, his eyes darkened. "Alexei Baranov." I stared, the name unfamiliar to me, but clearly terrifying to him. "Russian Mafia," Vincent said slowly, each word like a blade. "He once controlled the western side of the city until our family removed him after we signed a pact with the Bellini group. Alexei vanished, but it seems he only crawled into the shadows to wait." Dominic leaned against the wall, fists clenched. "Is he back for money or revenge?" Vincent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Marcus and gestured sharply. "Check every recent transfer connected to Bellini. Search the old warehouses and find the leak." A sudden realization struck me, my voice trembling. This morning, the guard escorting Lily got a phone call. He stepped away right before she disappeared. Marcus nodded grimly. "We have a mole." Lucia stood motionless, her eyes closing as though listening to something far beneath the surface. When she opened them, her voice was calm and cold. "Alexei doesn't want money. He wants to show the city we've lost control." Vincent nodded, eyes still fixed on the phone. "And he chose the one weakness I can't protect." I gripped his hand. "Vincent, I don't care who you are or what you've done. But if this happened because of me, because of Lily, then Vincent cut me off, his voice low and firm. "Don't ever think that you brought this here. They've been trying to break this family for years. Lily was simply the excuse." I looked into his eyes, red and raw, but tearless. I knew he was punishing himself. I also knew that for Vincent, every battle could be solved by blood and silence, but not this one. Because this time the victim was a child. My child. And she had become the fragile trust he had only just begun to allow himself to hold. Marcus returned nearly an hour later. The signal came from a mobile device near the abandoned warehouses in the South District. Alexei's old base. No security cameras, no streetlights. It's a dead zone. Vincent turned to me, and for the first time, he asked in a voice barely louder than a breath, yet steady as a vow, "I will bring Lily back. Do you trust me?" I nodded, though my throat burned. I had no other choice. And perhaps, just perhaps, I had never trusted anyone as much as I trusted him in that moment. "I want to go with you, Vincent." I must have said those words at least 3 times within 5 minutes, each time with a different inflection, pleading, angry, then hopeless. But he only looked at me, his eyes as unyielding as a stone wall. "Emily, it's not that I doubt your strength. It's that I know I won't be able to think straight if you're in danger. I lost Sophia. Cannot lose Lily. Not like that." He turned away right after saying it, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room as if the air had been sucked out of the world. Dominic was the one who led me upstairs, 2 guards following close behind. The door was locked from the outside. No violence, no threats, but enough for me to understand they would not let me leave that room until this was over. I didn't scream or pound on the door. Instead, I stepped out onto the balcony where I could see the front courtyard lit up as bright as day. 5 black SUVs were lined up. Vincent stood beside Marcus, wearing a bulletproof vest, his head tilted slightly as he listened to a report from a silver-haired man who was likely the security chief. Dominic approached, placing a hand on Vincent's shoulder, not speaking, only nodding. Vincent turned and looked up toward the balcony where I stood. Our eyes met for a long, suffocating moment. No words were needed. I understood everything he could not say. The door closed behind me as he stepped into the car. The convoy rolled out in silence, leaving only the sound of tires whispering across the pavement. I sank into a chair, holding my head in my hands, feeling hollow. Lucia knocked a while later. She didn't enter. She simply left a cup of ginger tea on the table and a printed photograph from the set I had taken on her birthday. In the picture, Lily sat on the grass with Rosa, leaning her head on Lily's shoulder, the 2 girls smiling as brightly as the last sunlight of autumn. I stared at that photograph for a very long time. Each passing second felt like another cut. I had never known helplessness like this. I once thought being a single mother was the hardest thing I would ever face. Sleeping in my car, skipping meals so Lily could have enough milk. But at least back then, I could hold her in my arms. Now she was somewhere out there, in the hands of men I had never seen, thrown into a war between men burdened with blood and the ghosts of their pasts. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. The room felt too tight, too silent. I walked to the balcony once more. The night wind was cold, carrying the damp scent of wild grass. Far in the distance, the sound of engines had already melted into the darkness, leaving a hollow space lodged in my chest. I could do nothing except hope. Hope that Vincent would keep his promise, that his heart, frozen after Sophia's death, had finally learned how to love again, not only with logic, but with every instinct of a man who had lost too much. And I, the nameless woman who had come here only to take a few photographs, could do nothing else but wait, holding my breath through every passing minute. I did not know how the night would end, only that when Vincent left, he hadn't taken the one weapon capable of cutting through the darkness. Me. And in the silence, I began to pray, not only for my daughter's safe return, but for the man who was risking his life to make it happen. The warehouse sat on the southern edge of the city, where asphalt roads gave way to dirt and gravel, and rusted fences surrounded industrial lots abandoned years ago. On a satellite map, it was nothing more than a gray speck between trees and scrapyards. But to Vincent, it was the clearest trace Alexei had ever left behind. The convoy stopped about 200 meters from the warehouse. Vincent stepped out first, crouching low in the darkness, his eyes fixed on the narrow path leading to the side door. Marcus clipped his earpiece into place and signaled for 2 men to split off and circle the right flank. No shouts, no alarms. They moved like phantoms, trained by years of unnamed missions in shadows no one ever acknowledged. Vincent carried no heavy weapons, only a handgun tucked behind his back and a small blade strapped to his leg. But in his eyes, there was something more dangerous than any weapon. The silent resolve of a man who would kill anything that stood between him and the child he hadn't fathered, yet now held entirely in his heart. When the side door cracked open, the hinges squealed softly, like a held breath. The team divided into 3 groups and advanced. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp metal and rust. Old wooden crates were stacked like a maze, forming narrow corridors and sharp corners. Vincent halted when he heard a faint sound at the end of the hallway. A muffled, quivering cry. He knew instantly it was Lily. His whole body tightened like a drawn bow as he moved forward, each step placed so carefully you'd think the ground itself could betray him. Marcus counted down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. Then they surged forward. 2 guards by the door didn't even have time to react before they were subdued. The small room opened, and a beam of a flashlight fell on the corner where Lily was tied to an old chair. She flinched at the light, her eyes wide with terror. But the moment she saw Vincent, tears flooded her face. No words, only Vincent's arms closing around her, his whole body trembling as he felt her warmth. He cut her loose and lifted her high against his chest, pressing her cheek to his shoulder as though letting go would cause the world to collapse. Marcus signaled for the team to withdraw, but at that moment the air shattered. Gunfire erupted from the warehouse's left wing, a brutal symphony of destruction. Another team, a rival force, had engaged Alexis's men. The metallic echoes of the shots ricocheted off the rusted metal walls, each flash a violent burst of lightning in the oppressive darkness. Vincent, his face a mask of grim determination, pulled Lily tight against him, shielding her completely. He became her fortress, a human shield against the chaos. He ran through the labyrinthine corridor, each stride measured, purposeful, and fierce. The floor vibrated beneath his weight as he propelled them forward. A figure lunged out, attempting to ambush them, a silhouette emerging from the shadows, intent on blocking their escape. But before the attacker could even raise his weapon, Vincent reacted with lethal precision, striking a clean, brutal blow to the man's neck. The attacker crumpled, falling silently to the ground, another casualty in this brutal game. By the time they reached the waiting vehicle, Marcus was already there, yanking the door open with impatient urgency. Vincent gently placed Lily into Lucia's waiting arms. She had been waiting in the back seat, her face pale and drawn, etched with the lines of fear and anxiety. Their eyes met in a single, shared breath. No questions were asked, no explanations offered. Everything was contained in the silent nod of a mother, the unspoken relief of seeing her granddaughter returned whole, unharmed. Vincent climbed in beside Lily as the SUV roared to life, the engine a guttural promise of escape. His hand remained clenched protectively on her small shoulder, his eyes unblinking, scanning the surroundings for any lingering threat. Lily, seeking solace and comfort, pressed her face into his chest and whispered in a cracked voice, "I knew you would come." Vincent lowered his forehead to hers, unable to answer, choked by a sudden wave of emotion. He knew it wasn't only Lily he had saved tonight. He had been saved too, rescued from a hollow space within himself, a desolate landscape he believed would never be filled again. I don't remember how I made it out to the courtyard. A chaotic blur of panicked movement and adrenaline-fueled desperation. All I recall is the visceral jolt of relief, the sudden lightness in my limbs as I saw Vincent step out of the dark-colored SUV. Lily was curled in his arms like a small, frightened kitten, her face buried against his chest, seeking refuge in his strength. I ran to them, my legs leaden, almost collapsing before I could gather her into my arms. I breathed in the familiar scent of her hair, the sweet, innocent fragrance that always calmed my soul. I felt the chill of her skin, the lingering cold of the warehouse clinging to her, the trembling breath still caught in her throat, a testament to the terror she had endured. The fear inside me broke open all at once, a dam bursting, spilling into uncontrollable tears. My entire body shook as I held her tight, terrified that if I loosened my grip, even for a second, she would vanish from me again. A cruel illusion snatched away before I could truly embrace it. Vincent said nothing. He simply stood there, a silent sentinel, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm. And in his eyes, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Not the coldness of a man accustomed to loss, the detached resignation of someone who had seen too much darkness. Not the calm facade of someone who had learned to hide his pain behind sharp angles and impenetrable defenses. But a quiet ache, a deep-seated sorrow finally soothed, a flicker of hope ignited in the darkness. Something too fragile to name, too profound to express, and yet deep enough to keep a person from ever turning away. I looked up at him, my eyes swollen, my voice raw with emotion. "Thank you." Vincent shook his head, his hand brushing gently against my shoulder, a comforting gesture that spoke volumes. "Don't thank me for something I should have done long ago. I failed, Sophia. I will not fail Lily." His words pierced me like a needle, sharp and painful, but also grounding, a sudden connection to reality. For so long, I had believed I didn't need anyone, that vulnerability was a weakness I couldn't afford. I had convinced myself that if I just tried hard enough, the world would stop hurting me. But as I held Lily, while Vincent's arms still trembled from the adrenaline and everything he had just risked, I realized I had been wrong. No one survives on strength alone. No one can protect what they love most without letting someone else step inside the fragile space of their life, without accepting help, without trusting in someone else's strength. I carried Lily back to our room, her small body limp with exhaustion. She fell asleep almost instantly in my arms, as if my presence was the last thread tying her back to this world, the final reassurance that she was safe. I sat beside her for a long time, my eyes still damp, smoothing her tangled hair, her peaceful slumber a stark contrast to the chaos we had just escaped. When I finally stepped outside, Vincent was leaning against the hallway wall, the soft light casting long shadows, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones. I walked toward him, not saying a word, drawn to him by an invisible force, and before I could think twice, I wrapped my arms around him. He froze for a moment, his body stiff with surprise, then slowly, tentatively, placed his hands on my shoulders, returning the embrace. The embrace was gentle yet firm enough for me to feel the rapid beat of his heart, a primal rhythm that resonated with my own. I pressed my cheek to his chest, letting myself lean on someone without guilt for the first time in years, allowing myself to be vulnerable to accept comfort. He had been there without hesitation, without fear, without retreat. He had stepped into danger for a child who wasn't his simply because I had once trusted the wrong person. And now, as I stood there with my daughter safe in my arms, I understood that what I saw in Vincent wasn't just a man shaped by darkness, a hardened criminal, but the only person patient enough to stand beside me without expecting perfection, without trying to fix me, simply choosing to protect what I cherished most. I lifted my head and looked up at him, my eyes no longer clouded with doubt. "I don't know where this is going. I don't know what we are, but if you hadn't come tonight, I don't know what would have become of me." Vincent placed a hand on my cheek, his gaze softening, his touch gentle. "I won't promise I'll never hurt you, but if you give me a chance, I promise you won't face anything alone again." For the first time in years, my heart stopped resisting. Perhaps it wasn't love, not yet, not the grand, sweeping romance of fairy tales, but it was trust. And for someone who had once been left standing alone in the rain, that was enough to begin again. A fragile seed of hope planted in the fertile ground of gratitude and respect. The morning after Lily returned, the atmosphere inside the estate felt strangely heavy, a palpable tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Everyone tried to act as though things were normal, but every glance, every careful step, carried something unspoken, a weight of knowledge that couldn't be ignored. Vincent left the room early, his movements abrupt and efficient. He didn't say much, just rested his hand briefly on my shoulder before walking out, his touch a silent reassurance. I knew his mind was working, the gears of his intellect grinding, but there was something else simmering in his eyes, a dangerous intensity, like embers waiting for a breath of air to ignite them into a raging fire. Marcus came shortly after breakfast, his face grim, carrying a USB drive in his hand. He didn't offer an explanation, simply plugged it into the computer in the library and stepped back, allowing Vincent to read whatever secrets were contained within. I couldn't see what was on the screen, but as I watched Vincent's face, the subtle shifts in his expression, I knew something inside him had cracked, something he had worked for years to keep intact, a carefully constructed wall now crumbling under the weight of betrayal. He didn't explode, didn't shout, didn't destroy anything. He simply closed the laptop, his fingers whitening around the edge, a silent testament to the rage building inside him. I stepped into the room, standing behind him, my voice barely a whisper. "Vincent, what happened?" He turned, his voice hoarse, raw with suppressed fury. "Dominic. He's the one who leaked Lily's location." He paused, as if holding himself together by sheer force of will. He didn't do it directly, but the man who took the bribe was someone Dominic handpicked, and communication was done through a secured channel only he has access to. My throat tightened, a wave of disbelief washing over me. No, why would he do that? Vincent looked at me, and his eyes weren't filled with anger. They were wounded, a deep betrayal etched into their depths. Because of power. Because he thinks you and Lily are a weakness, something that makes me lose control. Alexis was waiting for a chance like this, and Dominic gave him the reason he needed. I stepped back, not out of fear, but because the ground beneath me suddenly felt uncertain, the foundations of my world crumbling. Lucia walked in at that moment, her presence a silent question. She looked at Vincent, then at me, her eyes filled with a knowing sadness. She didn't speak right away, only sat down slowly, as if she had known this truth long before it surfaced. "He did the same thing to Sophia," she said quietly, gazing out the window, her voice laced with a quiet sorrow. "When she wanted to leave the family, to pursue art, to love someone Dominic couldn't control, he cut her off. He pushed her toward the underworld, and when she died, he called it fate." Vincent sank into the chair, his head falling into his hands, his posture defeated. He didn't cry, but his breathing filled the room, raw and heavy, a sound of unimaginable pain. Lucia continued, her voice steadier than I had ever heard it, fueled by a lifetime of suppressed anger. This time he went further. "And Vincent, if you don't stand up now, someone else will suffer next." I took Vincent's hand, refusing to let him slip into silence, refusing to let him succumb to the darkness that threatened to consume him. "You have to do something. Not for me. For yourself, for Sophia, for Lily." He lifted his head, his eyes filled with shadows and a newfound resolve. Dominic is in his study. The study, once the symbolic heart of the Moretti Empire, was lined with portraits of ancestors, their stern faces looming from the past. The dim yellow lamps cast a faint glow over aging leather and the stale scent of old tobacco, clinging to the air like a ghost. Vincent walked in without knocking, his presence a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Dominic looked up, his expression devoid of surprise, as if he had been expecting this confrontation. Vincent threw the USB onto the desk, the plastic clattering against the polished wood. "Do you have anything to say?" Dominic slowly closed the book in his hands, his voice calm enough to chill the blood. "You're being emotional, Vincent. This isn't betrayal. It's strategy." Vincent's jaw clenched, his muscles taut. "Delivering Lily to an enemy is strategy? You nearly got a child killed, your own family, and you dare call that strategy?" Dominic stood, his eyes darkening, a flicker of anger finally breaking through his carefully constructed facade. "It was necessary to protect our name. You're too weak. You let a woman cloud your judgment." Vincent stepped forward, his voice low and sharp as a blade, each word a carefully aimed strike. "If this name requires the blood of a child to survive, then it died a long time ago. I want no part of it." Dominic froze, the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. Silence stretched between them like a vacuum, thick with unspoken accusations and buried resentments. Then he turned away, his voice dropping into something cold and final, a pronouncement of judgment. "Then you are no longer a Moretti." Vincent laughed softly, bitterly, the sound devoid of humor. "No, I never was." He stepped out of the room without looking back, severing ties that had bound him for his entire life. And when the door shut behind him, it wasn't just the end of a lineage. It was the final crack of a dynasty built on blood and the beginning of something new, something more human, no matter the cost of breaking it apart. News of Dominic's betrayal spread through the inner circle in less than a day, a wildfire of whispers and accusations. Yet its impact traveled like a fracture cutting through the stone foundation of the Moretti family, weakening the structure from within. Handshakes became tighter, conversations shorter, and in the eyes of those who once stood unwaveringly loyal, there remained only suspicion and wary calculation. The old order was crumbling, and no one knew what would rise from the ashes. Vincent did not make many appearances after confronting Dominic. He withdrew into the background, spending most of his time in the old library that once belonged to Sophia, surrounded by the echoes of her laughter, her dreams, her unfinished paintings still lingering with the vibrant colors of memories. I didn't ask, nor did I push. I understood he was facing the greatest internal conflict of his life, wrestling with his conscience, grappling with the legacy he had inherited. How to preserve his honor without betraying his own blood. How to forge a new path without destroying everything he had ever known. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep in my arms, her small body radiating warmth, Vincent knocked on my door, his presence a silent request for entry. He stepped inside, his eyes shadowed, exhaustion carved into every line of his face, but his gaze no longer trembled. He had reached a decision, a turning point in his life. I sat up, accepting that gaze the way one listens to a final verdict, knowing that what he was about to say would change everything. Dominic will not be killed. His voice was quiet yet resolute, the decision final. I've thought about this dozens of times. Killing him might soothe the fury for a moment. But then what? It would only turn me into a mirror of him, perpetuating the cycle of violence. He spent his entire life believing fear was the only way to hold power. I choose something else. I nodded, saying nothing, though my eyes burned with unshed tears. Perhaps deep down, I had feared Vincent would choose the path of blood, the familiar route of retribution. But he didn't, and that made me trust him more than any vow ever could, more than any promise whispered in the dark. The next morning, Vincent called for an internal meeting, summoning the key players to the Greystone room, the very place where harsh decisions had once echoed through the halls. Now there was only a heavy silence when he entered, followed by Marcus and the two closest members of the family, their faces etched with anticipation. Dominic had been stripped of his authority, his power base shattered. All assets under his name would be transferred to a separate investment trust, ensuring he could no longer wield them to cause harm. He would leave Chicago permanently, exiled from the only world he had ever known. No one was to contact him, nor was his name to be mentioned in any strategic discussion from that day on, effectively erasing him from the Moretti history. Some reacted with surprise, others with disbelief, their faces reflecting the shock of the unexpected. But Vincent didn't wait for responses, his decision unwavering. This is not punishment. This is the only way to preserve the Moretti name without spilling more blood, to break the cycle of violence that has plagued this family for generations. Lucia sat at the far end of the table, her posture erect, her expression stoic. She wasn't shedding a single tear, her grief internalized. She simply looked at her son and nodded slowly, a final farewell that required no words, a silent acknowledgement of the burden he had chosen to carry. I stood just outside behind the barely closed door, quietly witnessing the moment Vincent shortened the distance between darkness and light with the weight of his own pain, choosing a path of redemption rather than revenge. Dominic was escorted out of the estate later that afternoon, his departure a stark contrast to the power he had once wielded. No ceremony, no farewell, only a silver car quietly disappearing beyond the black iron gates, carrying him away from his legacy, his family, his life. Vincent did not watch him go. He stood in the garden where Lily was playing with Rosa beneath the ancient maple trees, their laughter a fragile melody in the aftermath of the storm. When the car vanished from sight, I approached him, my footsteps hesitant. He didn't turn around, only spoke softly, his voice filled with a quiet sadness. That man taught me how to stare at an enemy without blinking. He also taught me never to forgive. But today I chose forgiveness. Not because he deserves it, but because of Lily, because of you, because of Sophia, because of myself. I tightened my grip around his hand, offering silent support. Vincent, you did the right thing. You didn't lose your honor. You preserved the last piece of humanity still left in all of this. He turned toward me, his eyes lighter than I had seen them since the first moment I met him, a glimmer of hope flickering in their depths. He watched Lily smile, running through the grass. Maybe, but doing the right thing doesn't make it easy. I understood, and I knew from that moment on, Vincent had stepped across a threshold no one had forced him to cross. He did not spare Dominic because he was incapable of vengeance. He did so because he chose to begin again, building something new from that fracture, forging a different kind of Moretti, a different kind of Vincent, and a future that no longer required cruelty to survive. After the day Dominic left the estate, the atmosphere slowly softened, as though a violent storm had finally passed, leaving behind the gentle warmth of an early autumn morning. The air felt lighter, the tension eased. Vincent spent more time in the garden, where Lily often played with Rosa beneath the maple trees, her laughter echoing through the air. The quiet no longer carried fear, but the innocent joy of children, a testament to the healing that was taking place. I often watched from a distance as he knelt to tie Lily's shoelaces, his expression tender whenever she wrapped her arms around his neck, or simply sat beside her without a word, their shared presence alone a testament to the bond that was growing between them. One afternoon, with golden sunlight spilling across the backyard, painting the landscape in warm hues, Vincent found me in the small studio I had set up in an empty room near the library. He looked at the photographs pinned along the wall, his gaze lingering on each image. Pictures of Lily, of Lucia, of Vincent beside the little girl. Moments neither posed nor polished. Only honest truths captured in passing light, glimpses of the life we were building together. He stood silently for a long time before turning to me, his eyes carrying a question he wasn't yet ready to speak aloud, a silent plea for acceptance, for understanding. I stepped closer gently, bridging the gap between us. If you're thinking about the future, I don't have an answer yet. But if you're asking whether I'm still afraid of you, then I'm not. Vincent smiled, fleeting, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. He moved toward me, not rushed, not hesitant, his approach measured and deliberate. When his hands came to rest on my shoulders, I didn't pull away. Not because I was ready for a new love, not because I had forgotten the pain of the past, but because for the first time, I didn't feel the need to protect myself from him, the instinctive urge to build walls around my heart. He didn't apologize for the past. He didn't offer empty promises for the future. He was simply there in front of me, present and vulnerable, with all his scars and silences, a man who had weathered the storm and was now reaching out for connection. One night after Lily had fallen asleep, her dreams a world away from the dangers we had faced, I invited Vincent to the rooftop terrace, a place where I often hid whenever the world felt too heavy, a sanctuary above the chaos. He brought 2 glasses of wine without asking what I wanted, simply knowing I needed something warm and quiet, a moment of peace to soothe my weary soul. We sat side by side, not too close, not too far, overlooking the city shimmering like 1,000 fallen stars, the vast expanse of lights stretching to the horizon. In that gentle darkness, I heard him speak, his voice low, drifting like the wind, carrying the weight of his past. I once thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, trying to atone in silence, punishing myself for my sins. But then you came, not loud, not demanding, not expecting anything from me. You were simply there, looking at me as if I might still be someone worth trusting, as if there was still good in me. I turned toward him, the faint light softening his face, and in his eyes, I saw none of the remnants of a powerful crime lord, none of the cold calculation that had once defined him. I saw only a man who had lost too much and was now trying to hold on to whatever remained with his bare hands. A man yearning for redemption, for connection, for love. I placed my hand on the back of his, offering a silent gesture of support, a connection that transcended words. I once thought I could never love again, that my heart was too damaged, too broken to be pieced back together. But maybe things that break aren't meant to return to their original form. Sometimes they only need to be pieced together with gentleness and patience, with a new understanding of their strengths and weaknesses. Vincent held my hand, not tightly, just enough to let me know I was being held, being chosen, being valued. In that moment, without confessions or promises, a single truth settled quietly in my chest, a realization that bloomed like a fragile flower. I had begun to love him, not because he was Vincent Moretti, the powerful and dangerous head of a criminal empire, but because he was the only person who stepped into my damaged world without trying to fix it, without judging my past, choosing instead to simply stay, to stand beside me in the darkness and offer a glimmer of hope. And that was the most precious thing I had ever been given, a gift I would cherish for the rest of my days. The meeting was scheduled for Friday in an old stone building deep in the historic district near the Eastern Docks, a place steeped in history, where the gray-green water reflected the muted gold of ships moored along the pier. It was where the Bellini family had held every major negotiation for nearly 3 decades, a neutral ground where rivals could meet under a fragile truce. A place no one outside the Mafia dared approach whenever word of a closed council was sent out. The air thick with unspoken threats and simmering tensions. Vincent wore a charcoal overcoat and a black shirt without a tie, his presence radiating a quiet authority that needed no embellishment, a confidence that spoke volumes. I watched from the bedroom window as he left the estate with Marcus and 2 of his closest guards. His expression unreadable, his features composed. His eyes, however, resembled a placid lake before a storm, deceptively calm, so calm it was unsettling. I knew he had prepared for this meeting for days, not just with documents, plans, and the list of those permitted to speak, but with the steady resolve of a man ready to sacrifice whatever remained to carve out a new path for his family, a man willing to risk everything for a chance at peace. By the time Vincent entered the meeting room, everyone had arrived, their faces etched with anticipation and suspicion. The Bellini family sat on the left, led by Lorenzo Bellini, a salt-haired man with a sharp smile and eyes that seemed to pierce through skin and bone, a seasoned negotiator known for his ruthlessness and cunning. On the right were the representatives of the 3 remaining groups from the old pact: Russo, D'Angelo, and Gianni, each faction vying for power, their loyalties shifting with the tides. No one smiled, no one shook hands. The air felt like gunpowder waiting for a spark, a single misstep capable of igniting a war. Lorenzo opened first, his voice deep and steady, commanding attention. "Vincent, we heard Dominic has been removed. What does that mean for the structure of the Moretti family? Is this a sign of weakness or a calculated move?" Vincent did not evade, did not offer excuses. "He no longer represents us. As of today, I am responsible for all decisions. Anyone who disagrees has left or will be removed from the system. My authority is absolute." A murmur rose from the Gianni table, a ripple of dissent spreading through the room, but Lorenzo lifted a hand for silence, silencing the objections. "Then what is the purpose of today's meeting? Why have you called us here?" Vincent leaned forward, his voice firm as stone, his gaze unwavering. "To re-establish order. We have allowed personal vendettas to cloud our collective interests, to distract us from the real threats. Dominic was wrong, but Alexei is the one who exploited that weakness to threaten all of us. He did not target only my family. If you think the Bellinis are safe, review your own history. He will come for you eventually." Lorenzo frowned but did not argue, his expression thoughtful. Vincent continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, holding each faction accountable. "We need a true alliance, not one on paper, but in action. I propose forming a new council. Each family gets 1 seat. Voting power scales with influence, but no one has absolute veto. All major transactions must be documented and signed by 3 parties. We set boundaries, and if anyone crosses them, the entire alliance will act as one to punish the transgressor. A silence followed, thick and deliberate, each member weighing the risks and rewards, calculating their potential gains and losses. Victoria D'Angelo, thin and sharp-eyed like a green viper, spoke first, her voice laced with skepticism. And if someone betrays the alliance, if someone breaks the rules? Vincent didn't hesitate, his response immediate and unwavering. They will be exiled. No protection, no negotiation. They will be left to fend for themselves, a pariah in our world. Marcus distributed printed plans, outlining the proposed structure of the new alliance, detailing the rules and regulations, the consequences of disobedience. Lorenzo took a copy, reading through each page, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't speak right away, merely lifted his gaze, his eyes assessing Vincent, searching for any sign of weakness or deception. And who will oversee this? Who will ensure that the rules are followed? Vincent allowed a faint smile, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Not me. I nominate Marcus and Carla Russo as co-heads of the Oversight Council. Neither is the head of a family. Neither has direct political incentives, and both are respected for their impartiality and integrity. Lorenzo set the documents down, folding his arms, his decision made. I must admit, Vincent, you are no longer Dominic's shadow. You've just accomplished what he never could, bringing enemies to the same table without firing a single bullet. You have shown a strength that goes beyond brute force. A ripple of nods spread across the room, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in power, the recognition of Vincent's authority. After a brief discussion, the representatives signed the agreement, their signatures a pledge of allegiance to the new alliance. There was no applause, no celebratory gestures, but the first handshake between Vincent and Lorenzo echoed like a final punctuation to an old era, a symbol of the fragile peace that had been forged. When Vincent walked out of that room, he didn't look back, his focus firmly set on the future. He knew what he had built was more than just an alliance among men who lived in darkness, a temporary truce between rival factions. It was the framework for an entirely new world, one where honor no longer depended on bloodshed, and trust once again became the most valuable currency on the table, a foundation upon which a new era could be built. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the large glass windows of the Lake Forest estate, spilling across the pristine white walls and polished wooden floors, wrapping the entire space in a warmth that was both elegant and strangely tender, a feeling that permeated every corner of the house. It was nothing like what Emily had once imagined life with the Moretti family would be, a stark contrast to the darkness and danger she had initially feared. She stood by the window, looking out to the wide garden where Lily was running freely, laughing brightly, her joy infectious. Her small hand was tucked safely inside Lucia's, her soft silver hair glowing under the sunlight. Lucia's eyes were filled with a love so gentle it made her look like a true grandmother, her face softened by a genuine happiness. Emily felt an unfamiliar rhythm settle into her chest, a sense of belonging she had never known, a way of living she had only dreamed of. The worries about money, safety, work, or tomorrow seemed to dissolve into a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. She had thought long and hard about going back to her old life, about familiar streets and familiar people, about the comfort of the known. But when she saw Lily happy in Lucia's arms, her heart overflowing with joy, she understood her decision was already made. She would stay. She would build a new future, not only for herself, but for her daughter, a future filled with love, laughter, and hope. Vincent stood quietly beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder, his touch a silent reassurance. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His presence alone, the kind of steady, unwavering presence she had never known from any man, was enough to calm her heart, to quiet the doubts that still lingered in the back of her mind. She turned to him and smiled softly, her resolve settling into place, her determination solidifying with each passing day. The first thing she did was plan her photography studio in one of the side wings of the estate, a space that had been unused for years. The natural light poured in from 3 directions, creating the perfect atmosphere for her art. The space was wide enough to house all her equipment. Cameras, lenses, softboxes, and large backdrops. She began rearranging everything, decorating with some familiar old pieces from her former studio. Items that held sentimental value, and adding new ones, carefully chosen to create a space that felt both like a return to her passion and a beginning, a fresh start. It was her way of marking a new chapter in her life, a visual representation of her journey. Lily watched her mother with fascination, her eyes wide with curiosity, occasionally jumping in to help fold colorful cloths, mimicking her mother's movements, before racing back to the window to call out to Lucia, her bright voice ringing through the room like a bell, filling it with warmth and laughter. Emily found herself overwhelmed by a wave of emotion, tears welling in her eyes as relief and happiness pulsed through her chest, a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. She remembered the long nights in the city, the hurried meals, the exhaustion of counting every dollar just to get by, the constant struggle to make ends meet. Now everything seemed to fall into place in a way she never dared to dream, a life she had only imagined in her wildest fantasies. Vincent walked slowly around the studio, watching how she chose each spot for her equipment, how she hung her photographs, her creative energy filling the space. His eyes shimmered with admiration, a silent acknowledgement of her talent. He offered suggestions, gentle and respectful, but always allowed her the freedom to decide, valuing her expertise and her vision. Emily felt trusted, truly trusted, and the warmth of that feeling settled deep in her heart, melting away the last vestiges of her fear. By late afternoon, when the golden light streamed into the room, bathing the space in a warm, inviting glow, Emily stood in the middle of her new studio, her haven, looking out toward the future, her heart filled with hope. The garden, where Lily and Lucia's laughter echoed just moments before, now held a different kind of music for Emily, the quiet rhythm of a new life taking root within these very walls. It wasn't merely the thrum of responsibility. It was a promise, a vibrant pulse of hope surging through the estate, gentle yet unwavering. This wasn't just a place of work anymore, a space defined by transactions and obligations. It was transforming into a sanctuary, a home where Lily could flourish, cocooned in safety and unconditional love. The decision to stay had evolved beyond a simple choice. It was a profound commitment, a solemn vow whispered to her daughter, to her own reclaiming heart, and yes, even to the enigmatic Vincent. As Lily, her face flushed with the joy of play, burst into her arms, Emily embraced her fiercely, her ear pressed against the tiny chest, listening to the rapid beat of her daughter's heart, inhaling the sweet, innocent scent of her hair. In that moment, every past hardship, every gnawing fear, every soul-crushing lonely night dissolved into insignificant fragments of a distant memory, merely stepping stones on a long, arduous path that had ultimately led her here, to this exact point in time. Now, finally, was the time to truly live, to wholeheartedly love, to painstakingly build something enduring, something real and tangible. That evening, a warm, inviting glow emanated from the estate, soft amber lights casting long, dancing reflections across the pristine white walls, transforming the grand structure into a beacon of comfort and belonging. Emily found herself on the balcony with Vincent, their fingers entwined in a silent language of newfound understanding and affection, their gaze drawn to the mesmerizing sight of the lake shimmering under the ethereal moonlight. Her heart swelled with an emotion so profound, so complex, that words seemed utterly inadequate to capture its essence. Vincent turned to face her, his voice a low, steady timbre in the still night air as he began to speak of their future, painting a vivid picture of what they could create together, brick by painstaking brick, dream by shared dream. He spoke of aspirations that were no longer Emily's alone, but belonged to them, to Lily, forming a tapestry woven with hope and shared purpose. Emily felt her heart tremble in response, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the moment. She inhaled deeply, drawing strength from the cool night air, her eyes shining with unwavering resolve and a love that knew no bounds. "I love you," she confessed, her voice filled with raw emotion. "I love the way you care, the way you protect, the way you respect me as an equal. I love the unwavering trust you bestow upon me, freely and without expecting anything in return. I choose to stay, Vincent. I choose you, I choose Lily, and I choose this home as the fertile ground where our happiness can finally take root and blossom. Vincent smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression that reached his eyes, softening the stern lines of his face. His gaze drifted briefly to Lily, her laughter echoing up from the garden below where she was still playing with Lucia, before returning to Emily. His eyes now pools of peace and profound joy, emotions he had long believed were lost to him forever. Emily realized, with a clarity that resonated deep within her soul, that life doesn't always present us with picture-perfect choices, neatly packaged and easily digestible. But it does, invariably, offer us chances, precious, fleeting chances to choose what truly matters, to grasp the opportunities that align with our deepest values. Love, unwavering trust, unwavering protection, and, most importantly, a place to call home, a sanctuary where we can truly belong. Their story, the story of Emily, Vincent, and Lily, stands as a poignant reminder that no matter how tangled and complicated life becomes, no matter how many obstacles are thrown in our path, love and trust remain the unwavering compass that guides us toward true and lasting happiness. If this story has resonated within your heart, if it has stirred something deep within your soul, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss our daily dose of heartwarming videos. Please like and share this video to spread these beautiful emotions far and wide, allowing others to find solace and inspiration in its message. And we would love to hear from you. Did this story touch a chord within your own life? Did it feel authentic, mirroring the complexities and triumphs of your own experiences? Please share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. We truly want to listen, to connect with you on a deeper level, to understand the unique tapestry of your hearts. Thank you for being with us on this journey. We wish everyone watching good health, immeasurable joy, and unwavering peace every single day. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video where we continue to explore more touching, inspiring, and profoundly human stories.